The courthouse doors groaned on rusted hinges as the heat of noon pressed down like a branding iron. Dry Creek Hollow, a scatter of warped wood and sun-bleached signs, had never known the weight of law beyond the sheriff's boots and the judge's bitter voice. But today the benches were full. Farmers in frayed shirts, wives clutching parasols, drifters leaning on walls. They all came to see the woman in chains. Clarabel McKenna stood at the center of the room, wrist shackled, her blue dress torn at the cuff, dust caked in its folds. She didn't flinch as the judge cleared his throat. His voice was slow and bitter, like molasses poured over gravel. "You stand accused of the murder of Sheriff Dalton Reese," he said. "How do you plead?" Clara said nothing. The judge looked to the deputy, a lean, red-eyed man with a permanent snarl. Clay Reese, brother to the dead man, now wearing his badge, stepped forward and laid a wide-brimmed hat on the table with care, like it was a relic. "She shot him in the chest," Clay said. "No witnesses. No reason except madness. A jealous, cold-hearted madness." Murmurs stirred like wind in dry grass. Old Henry Yates whispered to his neighbor that Dalton was never one for kindness, while Miss Abigail Dunn clutched her rosary tighter and mumbled that a woman who loses her husband too young loses her mind soon after. But no one dared speak loud enough to challenge Clay. Clara raised her chin. Her lips were dry, eyes rimmed in shadow, but her voice came out steady. "He wasn't the man you thought he was." The judge pounded the gavel. "That ain't a plea. I didn't kill him without reason." "That's close enough to a confession," Clay spat. "Let's quit wasting daylight." The judge paused, eyes heavy with reluctance. He knew Dalton, knew the man's temper, but knew his family too. And in Dry Creek Hollow, blood ran deeper than water or truth. He raised the gavel again. Then the door opened. Boot steps echoed sharp against the floorboards, slow and deliberate. A tall man entered, his long coat billowing behind him like a dust storm made flesh. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, stubble like gray ash dusting his jaw. All eyes turned. He didn't look at the judge or the deputy. He looked at Clara. She looked back, and her breath caught, not in fear, but in disbelief. Her hands tightened around the chains. The man stepped forward until he stood between her and the bench. His voice came low and clear, like wind rolling through canyon stone. "She's my wife." For a long moment, no one moved. The town held its breath. Clay's lip curled. "Who the hell are you?" "Jesse Whitlock," the man said. "And she's my wife." The name struck the room like a match to dry grass. Someone in the back gasped. Jesse Whitlock. The name was near legend, if legends were made of bullets and bad choices. A rider from a Hollow Men gang, thought dead after the Red Rock Pass massacre 10 years back. "That can't be," someone whispered. "He's a ghost." Clay reached for his pistol. The only ghosts in this room are about to be buried. But Jesse didn't move for a weapon. He turned to the judge instead. "I aim to speak. You owe her that much." "She's on trial, not you," Clay barked. "She didn't kill him without cause," Jesse said. "You know it, and I do too." The judge looked between the outlaw and the widow. For the first time, his voice faltered. "You married her 10 years ago, before I disappeared." Jesse's eyes met Clara's again, softer now. "I was on the run. Thought I could keep her safe if I stayed gone. I was wrong." Clara said nothing, but her expression cracked. A flicker of pain, of memory, something older than grief. Clay stepped forward, hand on his gun. "He's lying, trying to save a murderer." Jesse's gaze didn't shift. "You know what your brother was. You wore his badge, but you buried his secrets, too." The gavel hit the desk again, weaker this time. "I'll allow a pause in sentencing," the judge muttered, "if only to make sense of this damn mess." Clay's jaw tightened. "She'll hang either way." Jesse turned toward the door. "Then I've got work to do." Clara's voice rose before he reached it. "Why now?" He stopped. "Why did you come back?" she asked, voice thin but piercing. "You left me to them." He didn't turn around. "Because I heard what they did. And I wasn't dead. I was just too much of a coward to come home." And then he was gone, coat snapping behind him like a cracked whip in the wind. The judge called for recess. The benches emptied. Clay stormed out, his badge gleaming like a threat. Clara stood alone in her chains, shoulders square, heart racing. Out in the street, wind stirred the dust. Dry Creek Hollow, once a place of silence and habit, now hummed with whispers and uncertainty. And somewhere in that rising storm, Jesse Whitlock was walking straight into the past he'd buried. And he wasn't planning on walking back alone. The sun had dropped behind a ridge by the time Jesse Whitlock made his way through the lower stretch of Dry Creek Hollow, his boots dragging trails through the dust. The air held the last heat of the day, but the wind had changed, cooler, edged with the promise of something shifting. He walked past shuttered storefronts and lamplit porches, where townsfolk whispered low and watched from behind curtains, trying to fit this stranger into the puzzle of what they thought they knew. Inside the sheriff's office, Clara sat behind iron bars in a dim holding cell. A slant of evening light crossed her lap, casting long shadows across her hands that once stitched torn shirts and baked bread and wrote letters never sent, hands that now trembled from restraint, but not fear. When Jesse entered, she didn't rise. She looked at him like a wound slowly remembering its ache. "I didn't think you were alive," she said. "I wasn't," he replied, easing onto the bench outside her cell. "Not the part that mattered. You were gone 10 years. I know." He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I buried you in memory, Clara. Thought it was mercy. Thought I was poison. I left before the gallows could take me. But leaving didn't save you." She stared through the bars. "You don't get to be the hero now." "I'm not trying to be," he said quietly. "I just want you free." The silence stretched between them like a canyon, deep and cracked with history. Finally, Jesse reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, creased, yellowed, and signed by a preacher's hand. "Our marriage license, dated and proper." Clara blinked at it. "You carried that all these years." "No. I went back to where we left it, the old church outside Red Rock. Thought maybe ghosts left it behind for me." Clara leaned forward slightly. "You plan to use that paper to buy me mercy?" "I plan to make the town listen. Maybe they'll believe a husband where they won't believe a widow." Her laugh was short and bitter. "The town only believes what it fears, and they fear Clay." Jesse's jaw set. "Then we remind them why they feared me." Footsteps sounded outside the office. The door creaked open, and Deputy Clay Reese entered, his expression already sour. "Well," he said, shutting the door behind him, "ain't this a damn family reunion?" Jesse stood. "You didn't come to talk about Ken." Clay rested a hand near his holster. "I came to tell you this little act of yours won't change a damn thing. She killed my brother. Your brother beat her senseless and blackmailed half this town," Jesse said, voice flat. "That's what your badge is hiding." Clay's nostrils flared. "You got proof of that, Outlaw?" Jesse met his stare. "There's a journal. Dalton kept records. Names, dates, bribes. He was too proud not to. Clara knows where it is." Clay's smirk faltered. "She's spouting lies to save her neck." "She didn't say a word. I found out on my own." Jesse stepped closer. "That journal surfaces, and you go down with him. I know what you did outside Mesquite Ridge. So does the man who got away." Clay drew his gun halfway. "You say that name again, and I'll silence you before the cock crows." "You try," Jesse said, voice like dry stone, "and I'll make you famous for dying first." Tension crackled between them until Clara spoke. "Enough." The two men turned. She stood now, close to the bars, eyes fierce and unwavering. "You want truth," she said to Clay. "Dalton kept the journal hidden under the hearth, beneath the stone with the iron hook. You want to burn it, I bet." Clay's face twitched, just enough to confirm it. "You really think they'll believe an old story and a paper book?" he sneered. "They'll believe me, like always." "They believed Dalton, too," Jesse said, stepping between him and Clara. "Until they didn't." Clay glared a moment longer, then turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him, shaking the frame. Jesse watched until the silence returned, then sat down again. His hand dropped to his side, rubbing at an old scar under his shirt. "What happened to you?" Clara asked, quieter now. I tried to run from the man I used to be, Jesse said. But no matter how far I went, I kept finding him in every mirror. And now I stopped running. She studied him, as if trying to peel away a decade's worth of silence. You think saving me will make you good? No, he said, but maybe it makes me better than I was. The oil lamp on the desk flickered as the wind grew stronger outside. Somewhere down the road, a horse snorted, unsettled. Thunder rolled faintly, or perhaps it was distant gunfire. In Dry Creek Hollow, those sounds often meant the same thing. Clara sank onto the small cot in her cell. Even if you find the journal, they might not care. Clay has men loyal to him. He's already wearing the badge. I don't need them all, Jesse said. I just need enough. The truth's a heavy thing. Eventually, it crushes the lies under it. Clara looked toward the window, where night now pressed thick against the glass. What if it crushes me too? She asked. Then I'll hold it for you. She said nothing more, but for the first time since he returned, her eyes softened, just a flicker, like the first star fighting its way through the dusk. Jesse stood and walked to the desk, checking the latches on his revolver and the knife hidden at his boot. He looked once more at Clara, the woman he'd once left behind and now could no longer walk away from. I'll be back by morning, he said. And if you're not, then bury me deep, he said, and remember me better than I deserve. He stepped into the night, coat whipping behind him, and the door swung shut. In the silence that followed, Clara sat alone, once more alone, but not abandoned, and waited for the truth to come knocking. The hollow changed after dark. It breathed differently. Wind crept low and mean through the alleyways between weather-worn buildings, rattling window panes like fingers tapping a coffin lid. Lanterns swung on frayed cords, casting uncertain halos across the dirt road. Jesse Whitlock rode silent, his mare's hooves muffled by the dust. He wore his hat low, one hand on the reins, the other resting loosely near the grip of his revolver. The house he sought sat at the edge of town, past the blacksmith's and the shuttered church, where prairie grass had begun reclaiming the fences. Sheriff Dalton Reese's house was just as he remembered it, smug and symmetrical, with white paint peeling at the corners and a porch too wide for the man who used it. Jesse dismounted in the dark, his boots thudding soft on packed earth. He waited a beat, listening. No dogs. No patrols. Clay hadn't posted guards. That was arrogance, or fear of leaving it in anyone else's hands. Jesse crossed the porch in silence. He pushed the door open with the ease of a man who'd broken into worse places, and stepped inside. The air was stale with old pipe smoke and spilled liquor. He moved through it with care, guided by memory. The hearth stood cold and abandoned beneath the mantel where Dalton had hung his father's rifle. Jesse dropped to one knee and felt for the stone with the iron hook. It gave under his hand. He pried it loose. Beneath the stone lay a small metal box, tarnished but intact. He opened it, and the lantern on the wall caught a glint of something smooth, leather-bound, stitched along the edges, with the initials DR carved in the corner. Jesse flipped it open. There it was. The truth. Dalton had documented everything. Payoffs from landowners, threats delivered to rival ranchers, evidence buried, women silenced. Jesse scanned the entries, and as he did, a bitterness rose in his throat. Clara's name appeared again and again. Harassment, threats, and finally, ownership. Dalton had written of her like one wrote of livestock. Jesse closed the book and stood. And that's when he heard it, the creak of wood under a boot outside. He moved quick, back pressed against the wall, eyes trained on the front door. The knob turned. The door opened. Two men stepped inside, guns drawn. Clay's men, rough-eyed, heavy-handed, more muscle than mind. Jesse didn't wait. He fired once, clean and fast. The first man dropped before his shadow caught the floor. The second ducked and returned fire. The shot tore through the mantel behind Jesse's head. Jesse rolled, came up behind a chair, and fired again. The second man fell backward into the porch door, his revolver skidding across the floor. Jesse didn't linger. He took the journal, wrapped it in a cloth from the kitchen, and bolted into the night. Behind him, the house echoed with stillness broken only by the groans of dying men. The streets were quieter now, but not safe. Word would spread fast. He turned the mare north, past the livery and the edge of town, and made for the edge of the canyon, toward a shack he'd used years ago, back when he'd worn darker colors and slept with a gun under his pillow. At the cabin, he lit a small lantern, dropped the saddlebag, and exhaled hard. He wasn't out of time, but it was running thin. Back in Dry Creek Hollow, Clay stood over the bodies of his men in his brother's house, jaw clenched tight, breath heaving like a man choking on his own fury. He kicked over a broken chair, then turned to the street outside. "Find him," he growled at the others. "I want Whitlock bleeding in the dust before dawn. And bring the girl out of her cell. She's bait now." By the time Jesse returned to town, it was near midnight. A hush had settled over the hollow, but it was the kind that came before lightning struck. He moved toward the jail, journal hidden inside his coat. But something was wrong. The front door to the office hung open. A single lantern burned inside, casting long shadows along the floor. And Clara was gone. The cell door lay open, swinging gently. On the cot, someone had carved a word with a knife. 2 letters scorched into the wood. R.R. Red Ridge, a bluff 2 miles south of town. A place where feuds were settled, law turned to whispers, and men vanished. Jesse had been there once, when the hollow men had needed silence for their sins. He mounted his horse again and rode fast. The moon climbed high behind him, silver and sharp, cutting across the desert like a blade. As he reached the ridge, he saw the firelight, 3 torches, set in a wide ring. Figures moved within the glow. He counted 5 men. 1 woman. Clara stood tied to a post, her face bloodied, dress torn again, but her chin held firm. Clay stood in front of her, pacing slow, a snake before the strike. "You always thought you were above us," he said. "Too proud, too clever, but you belong in the dirt like the rest." She didn't reply. Jesse slid down from his horse in the dark, ducked low, crept through the brush. He checked his revolver, 5 shots. He'd need every one. A guard stood near the outer ring of fire. Jesse moved behind him like a shadow. One hand on the man's mouth, the other drove his knife quick and deep. The man dropped soundlessly. For left. He edged closer, found cover behind a dead log. Clay kept talking. "You think Whitlock will save you? He's a ghost. And I'm flesh. I own this town. I wear the badge now." Clara looked up at him, blood at her lip. "That badge," she said, voice hoarse, "smells like your brother's sweat." Clay raised a hand to strike. The shot rang out before he could. It hit his wrist, sent the gun flying. He screamed. Jesse stepped into the firelight. Guns rose toward him. 2 men fired. He dropped to one knee and returned fire. The first bullet took one in the throat. The second struck the other in the chest. They dropped like sacks. Clay scrambled for his weapon. Jesse fired again, missed. The 5th man charged him from the side. They collided hard. Jesse rolled, dust and fists flying. The man pinned him, knife in hand, but Jesse headbutted him, drove an elbow into his gut, and tore the blade free. 1 slash, 1 groan, and the man rolled off, twitching. Clay had his gun again. He fired. The shot grazed Jesse's shoulder, burning hot. Jesse didn't stop. He hurled the knife. It struck Clay's thigh. The deputy howled and dropped. Jesse stood, chest heaving, blood running down his arm. He walked to Clara, cut the ropes with shaking fingers. She collapsed against him for half a second, just enough to breathe again. "You came," she whispered. "I said I would." She looked up at him. "Behind you." Jesse turned. Clay had crawled to his revolver, lifted it with both hands. A final shot cracked. Clay slumped. His weapon fell. Clara still held Jesse's second pistol, arms trembling, eyes wide. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The ridge burned with dying firelight. Bodies cooled in the dust. Wind swept across the canyon like an old song, carrying blood and justice, and the silence that follows both. Jesse holstered his gun, then took Clara's hand. "Come on," he said. "We still have to show them the truth." Morning in Dry Creek Hollow cracked open with a bruised sky and a silence that felt unnatural. The usual sounds, the hammering at the blacksmith's forge, cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of wagon wheels, were gone. Folks had gathered in the town square like they were waiting for something heavy to fall from the clouds. The kind of silence before a hanging or a storm. Jesse Whitlock rode in slow, Clara seated behind him, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. Dust clung to them like guilt. His shirt was torn, shoulder bandaged with a strip of her dress, and the revolver at his hip hung heavier than it had in years. Clara's eyes stayed fixed forward, unflinching, even as folks gasped to see her alive. No one moved to stop them, not even the deputies loitering outside the sheriff's office, unsure if they still answered to a lawman who hadn't come home. They dismounted at the center of town. Jesse tied his mare near the well, then pulled the wrapped journal from his saddlebag and handed it to Clara. She took it without a word, fingers tightening around the leather-bound truth. They walked into the courthouse together. Inside, it was already crowded. Word had spread faster than Jesse expected. Clay Reese was dead. Clara Mayfield was alive. And Jesse Whitlock, outlaw turned ghost, had returned with fire and reason. The mayor, a soft man named Ellison with a sharp mind and a spine that came and went like the tide, stood up from the bench when they entered. "Whitlock," he said carefully, "you've caused quite a stir." Jesse ignored him. He placed the journal on the table in the center of the room. "Read it," he said. Murmurs broke like ripples across the crowd. Ellison hesitated, then motioned to his clerk. Pages turned. Gasps followed. The further the clerk read, the more the room changed. Eyes narrowed. Mouths hardened. One woman wept quietly in the back. "He documented it all," Jesse said. "Every payment, every threat, every name. Clara was never his prisoner by law, just by fear. You let him run this town like a kingdom. You let her be chained in front of you." Ellison's lips moved, but no words came. He sat slowly, sweat beading beneath his collar. Deputy Munson stepped forward, pale and shaking. "We didn't know." "You knew," Clara said, her voice cold and clear. "You knew what Dalton was. You just hoped he'd never come for you." Jesse stepped beside her. "This town has a choice. Bury what happened and go on pretending, or face it. Make it right." A long silence followed. Then old Martha Kane stood from the back pew. Her hands shook as she pointed at the journal. "My son tried to stand up to Dalton 3 years ago," she said. "They said he left town. But he never wrote. Never came home." Others stood. One by one. Voices rose, not in anger, but in revelation. A reckoning bloomed like wildfire, quiet at first, then roaring. Ellison cleared his throat. "Clay is gone. Dalton's dead. The law is broken." He looked at Jesse. "What do you want?" Jesse paused. "Look to Clara. I want you to appoint someone who answers to the people," she said. "Someone who knows what fear feels like but chooses justice anyway. Not some man with a badge and an iron spine, but someone with eyes open wide." Ellison turned back to Jesse. "And you?" Jesse smiled, faint and tired. "I just want to be done running." That afternoon, the people of Dry Creek Hollow voted. They chose Clara, not because she was the loudest, not because she asked, but because when she had every right to burn the town down, she stood in the ashes and built something instead. By sundown, her name was etched on the office door. The new sheriff of Dry Creek Hollow didn't carry a whip or a promise of vengeance. She carried a ledger, a steady aim, and a stare that could still a room. As for Jesse, he left. Not with ceremony, not with applause. Just a quiet goodbye at the edge of town. "You sure?" Clara asked, watching him mount up. He nodded. "You've got the badge now. I was never built for law. Just clearing the path." She stepped forward, slid something into his saddlebag. "The journal. Keep it," she said. "A reminder." He looked at her for a long second. Then he tipped his hat. "I'll see you again." She smiled. "Only if there's trouble." He grinned, spurred the mare, and vanished into the orange dusk. Behind him, Dry Creek Hollow began to breathe again, not clean, not yet, but with lungs that remembered justice, even if they'd forgotten the sound. And the legend of the man who rode in from nowhere to rescue a woman bound in chains, and the sheriff she became when no one else would stand, settled into the soil like roots. Quiet, permanent, waiting for the next wind to stir the dust.